Psalm 67 picks up right where Psalm 65 and 66 left off. These are songs for use during the various religious festivals, but certainly a corporate worship, and this psalm in particular is a blessing. And I call it a missionary prayer. That's not really a technical genre of psalms, but we can't help but look at this through the lens of the church and the gospel and see that this is one of the great missionary prayers of the Old Testament. First of all, we look at the poetic structure of it. We notice that there is a refrain. There's a chorus. Verses 3 and 5 are identical. Let the peoples praise you, O God. Let all the peoples praise you. And then we have the use of the word earth occurring 4 times, and each time with a little different flavor of meaning. In verse 2, that your way may be known on earth. That is the realm where God's revelation is received. So God's revelation is received all over the earth, right? Psalm 19, the heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. So everywhere on the earth, whether it's through God's spoken word or his created, his nature, the earth itself, God's revelation is made known throughout the earth. In verse 4, it is highlighting the earth as the place where people dwell, the nations of the earth. And then verse 6 highlights the aspect of the earth as the soil, as the land, yielding its increase, the harvest. And again, we think of Psalm 65. And then verse 7, we're back to this idea of the ends of the earth fear him. So we're talking about, again, the people of the earth. So interesting different uses of the word earth there. We see that the psalm is centered around the nations, the peoples, those who are outsiders from the Jewish perspective. They were not the Jewish people, but everyone else, the Gentiles, the Goyim. The psalm is framed by a blessing. May God be gracious to us and bless us, make his face shine upon us, in verse 1. And then God shall bless us, and all the ends of the earth, let them fear him. So it's framed by a blessing. Then the focus moves to the earth and to the nations, that your way may be known on earth, your saving power among the nations. And then verse 6, the earth, this is more the idea of the soil, will yield its increase. God will bless us. The earth will flourish. And then we have this refrain that falls next in verses 3 and 5 that depicts a call to worship. And the center of worship here is the sovereign and just God. God judges the peoples with equity and guides the nations upon the earth. God is the sovereign king of the earth. And so God is at the center. And so it's a picture here of the earth and its nations flourishing when God is placed at the center of it all. So the poetry itself reinforces the meaning of the Psalms. When we place God at the center of all things, our lives, our nation, the nations of the earth, our justice, when God is incorporated in all of those as the sovereign and final authority, human beings will flourish. That's the sense of this psalm. Now, we titled this song a key word of Aaron. That's because it's related to the Aaronic or the priestly blessing of Numbers 6:22 through 27. You can see the similarities there. May the Lord be gracious to us and bless us and make his face shine upon us. So it's all right there in the blessing. So the priests were commanded to bless the Israelites, and in this way God would put his name on them and bless them. So this is the priestly blessing, and now this blessing is applied to the entire nation. So it's a prayer that God would bless us so that your way would be known on the earth and your saving power among the nations. It's a desire that the blessing that God bestows on Israel would be shared by the nations as well, that blessing would be extended. And indeed, that is the answer to that prayer down in verses 6 and 7. God will bless us. God shall bless us. The ends of the earth will fear him. So it is an expansion, if you will, an extension of this Aaronic or priestly blessing, that a prayer that God would bless us so that we could be a blessing to the nations. I think that's even more clear when we consider the Great Commission of the Old Testament. That's Genesis 12, 1 through 3. You may not have known that, but this is the first statement of the Great Commission. And it is this central idea that God blessed Abraham, or Abram at this point. God blessed him so that he would be a blessing and that all peoples on earth would be blessed through him. Further verses will clarify that as through your seed, through your offspring, and Paul in the book of Galatians will identify that specifically as Jesus, that Jesus would come through this line of Abraham and be a blessing to all the nations of the earth. And so this Great Commission was given to the Israelites way back at the beginning. Genesis chapter 12, the patriarchs, Abraham, the first of them, was called to be a blessing. And we could trace this throughout Israel's history, that there were ways that they blessed the nations around them. Even as slaves in Egypt, they were in a sense a blessing. And certainly before then, when Joseph went to Egypt and saw what was to come, the famine that was to come, Joseph was a blessing to Egypt. And there are literally dozens and dozens of examples of this, of how Israel was a blessing to the nations around them. Now, there are also counter examples as well, where Israel was not a blessing to the nations, and they were rebuked for that. The book of Jonah is an example of that. Here was a prophet that was called to be a blessing to the people of Nineveh, and he rejected that purpose that he had. This principle has been stated in several different ways. One of them that I like is this idea of privilege and purpose, that God has privileged us, He has blessed us, in order that we might be a blessing. We're blessed to be a blessing. If you ever experience blessing in your life, know this, that you are blessed to be a blessing, to pass it on, to share it with others. This is the way that we are wired. This is an aspect of what it means to be made in God's image. God is a blessor. He delights in giving good gifts, and when we receive good gifts, we should delight in passing those on and giving them to others. And so God has given us great privilege as His people. He has revealed Himself to us. He has made known His ways to us, His saving power to us. And so it is now our obligation, our responsibility, to share those blessings with the nations. And note the promise there that the earth will flourish, and that the ends of the earth will fear Him. They'll worship Him, and they'll align their lives with His ways. This is the promise of human flourishing that will come when the people of the earth submit to the benevolent rule of our God. And so this psalm is the middle of three great missionary psalms. Psalm 47, clap your hands, all ye nations, as the King ascends to His throne, and the nobles of the nations take their place as the people of the God of Abraham. Psalm 87 will describe the nations around Israel coming to Zion, and it will be said of them that they were born in Zion, and God will write their name in the register of the peoples. So here in the middle of those Psalms 47 and 40 and 87 is Psalm 67, this prayer that God's way would be known on the earth, and that God's blessing would come to the nations. Please make this your prayer every day. This is the heart of God for the salvation of all people, and for the nations to come under His lordship and therefore under His blessing.